Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, another college football week in the books. And the more we see teams, the less I feel like we know about a lot of them. You look at results from 2 weeks ago and compare them to results from this week, and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And it feels like that's true like across the sport, which is actually kind of fun.
It's interesting to me. I think this season college football is, to me, it's targeting. I don't know what it is. You can tell me what it is, and I'll say okay, but then it might just get overturned in replay and be like, nope, that's not what college football is. It's actually this. And I'll be like, okay, I don't know. I just enjoy watching it, and whatever you tell me it is, that's fine. It's like teaching kids science. Whatever you say, they have to believe you because they're kids, and that's how I am. I feel like a child watching college football, trying to learn all of the different things about photosynthesis and what's a genus and what's a kingdom and all of that stuff. I have no idea. And what I do is I just cram each week and then I forget it the next.
You get kicked out automatically if you lead with your phylum. So be careful not to do that. That's a very important part of the targeting rule. That's the only thing I know, but that's a very important part of the targeting.
Right,
rule.
but it also depends. Are you defenseless and all of that? Who knows? I don't know. So let's, as we look at some of the top games, I think the overarching message here, Tom, is that Ohio State is very much still in the playoffs because I don't know how many playoff teams there are going to be. I know there's going to be 4. Okay, yes,
that is so that you do know,
but I don't know how many teams will be there. Will have earned that spot. Somebody may get it by default because it's like, well, we need a 4th. It's like when you show up to golf with 3 people and you're like, hey, anybody, can somebody be the 4th? We need a 4th. And then you go around the clubhouse, hey, we need a 4th. This is, Ohio State just shows up and was like, I'll be a 4th. And then, there you go. Now you're in the playoffs.
Yeah, this whole college football season has been a golf foursome, but Johnny Knoxville's off in the trees with an air horn. Like that's the kind of college football season this has been so far. But you're right. I mean, this is, you see a lot of Ohio State fans going, this is not a college football playoff team. This is not a team that deserves to be in the college football playoff. Well, there are years when maybe 5 or 6 teams deserve to be in the college football playoffs. And there's years when maybe 2 or 3 teams deserve to be in the college playoffs. But here's the thing. The TV networks are going to insist that there are exactly 4 teams in the playoffs because that's what the TV contract says. So deserves got nothing to do with it. TV, ESPN has inventory to fill, so there will be 4 teams. And as ridiculous as it sounds, because this is a flawed Ohio State team, unquestionably, there's so many flaws with so many other teams that you came into the year thinking this is absolutely a playoff team or at least a playoff contender, that some flawed team is going to make it in this year. That's almost, and maybe 2 flawed teams are going to make it in this year.
I think we are both in agreement. Alabama and Georgia, probably the 2 best teams in the nation right now, but both have their issues. We've seen Alabama get run on. They have trouble with stopping quarterbacks that can run. They've had some issues running the ball themselves. Georgia finally can absolutely score on anybody now after scoring 60-some points on Vandy. That's an unquestioned. They are back now. Their offense is just fine. We don't actually know that until we see it. I don't know when we'll see that, actually, Tom. When is Georgia going to, have to face somebody that the offense will be tested? But we can go ahead and set those 2 teams aside, as if they both show up into the SEC championship game with no losses, they're both in. And and if one shows up with 1 loss and the other shows up with 0 losses and the undefeated team loses, I think they're still both in, based on the fact that it's unlikely that we're going to see chalk the rest of the way from everybody else, because we haven't at this point. I got home Saturday night, I don't know, it was like 1:30 or something, and Oregon was leading at home against Arizona 24-19. 0-3 Arizona. Terrible Arizona was right in the thick of that. They eventually lost 41-19. But that's just an indication. I think Oregon is like number 3 at the time, that there is going to be so much more that happens this season. And of course, like, who is still alive, Tom? Who is out right now? Because we were talking before the show. The ACC is done.
Yeah, I mean, barring a miraculous run for Wake Forest or Boston College, which is not completely out of the realm of possibility, I guess, mostly because the rest of the ACC looks like it's extremely bad this year. Those teams are in the same division, so one of them is going to have a loss. But if Boston College, right? Boston College has Clemson this weekend, right? Yeah, I know they're undefeated.
Yeah,
they're at Clemson this week. Okay, so if they get through this week at Clemson, like, you could tell me that Boston College runs the table, and it's like, I wouldn't have seen this coming before the season, but now, like, oh, sure, why not? But yeah, barring something really unexpected like that, yeah, the ACC pretty much has to be done. Clemson's got 2 losses, just lost Brian Bresee for the year, just lost Will Shipley for probably a month or so. I mean, there's just, they have no offensive line. They have had no offensive line for a while, and it was like they just are non-competitive because of how bad that offensive line is. They have no offense at all. And North Carolina was the other one that people came into the year thinking, maybe this is a team that may, is this the year someone unseats Clemson as the champion of the ACC? If so, it's definitely going to be North Carolina. Like, well, they lost to a Virginia Tech team that turns out that it's not very good. And then they just got blasted by Georgia Tech, like blasted by Georgia Tech. I mean, this is a North Carolina team that's, I think people came into the year, is this team for real? Is this, let me answer that for you. No, they are extremely not for real. They are like extremely not for real. And, outside of them, you go through the rest of the ACC and it's like Miami's 2-2 and might fire their head coach. Florida State's 0-4. I mean, might fire their head coach. NC State's 3-1. Like, sure, okay. Would you like to bet your life on NC State, running the table and being an 11? Like, good luck with that. History says good luck. Louisville's 3-1, but they're not actually very good. I mean, they got annihilated by Ole Miss in the season opener. It's just, there's just nothing there. And so, yeah, I think you can pretty much write off the ACC at this point. And now, okay, there's where the other SEC potential berth in the playoff comes from. But I don't know how much faith I have. The Pac-12 is basically down to just Oregon. The Big 12 is down to a really, really, really shaky Oklahoma, who keeps looking like they're about ready to lose. Like, there's just not a lot of, I mean, sure, Baylor, you want to tell me Baylor runs the table? You want to tell me Oklahoma State runs the table? Like, maybe. But I don't think any of those teams are good enough to make it through what's it's not a great conference, but it's a deep conference. I don't think there's anyone in that league that's going to run the table. So, at that point, it's like, you tell me it's Oregon, Ohio State, and the 2 SEC teams, or, maybe Cincinnati runs the table and steals a berth from, Oregon or Ohio State or something, maybe. But yeah, it is a remarkably weird season. And it's still September. Like, you're writing off whole conferences, and it's still September. That is like historically been a terrible decision. But when all these teams have 2 losses, all the potential contenders that you thought preseason might be a legit contender have 2 losses already and look incredibly flawed. Like, they've got more on the way. Like, I don't know what else you think.
Yeah, maybe if Boston College gets that win at Clemson this week, they can finally be ranked. When I say the ACC is done, that's just the understanding is that Boston College at some point is going to trip up, like all of these ACC teams do, because they're so evenly packed. They're not, there's not a lot of difference between BC and Virginia Tech or BC and Virginia, or they're all very similar. And so losing a game on the road or a random Thursday night or Friday night isn't that unheard of, because it's heard of every year and almost every week in the ACC. Look at North Carolina losing to Georgia Tech this past week, where the Tar Heels now they're softer than Mac Brown's old soft Texas teams. Those Texas teams had more talent, so they were able to get more done. But boy, that's a disappointing look for North Carolina. I wonder, that Cincinnati Notre Dame game this week, and we'll preview the games next week. That might be a playoff play-in game based on everything else going on. When you look at who might not be in, who might not be out. Oregon, I've said that I think an Oregon loss, depending on what that loss is, could have Ohio State jump them. Losing to Arizona would have been that kind of loss. Mm-hmm. So, they were a quarter away from doing that. So there are some issues there that you're going to have to keep an eye on. I don't think Ohio State is beholden to Oregon, but you look at Cincinnati's schedule, you look at Notre Dame's schedule, those teams, like those two, I don't know that they have many more tests after each other.
No, I mean, I'm going to read down Notre Dame's schedule, and this sounded real impressive a couple weeks ago, and then now it's like, oh boy. So you get Cincinnati this weekend, which, if you win that, that's a good win. After that, at Virginia Tech, USC, UNC, Navy, UVA, Georgia Tech, at Stanford. Like that is an absolute murderer's row of teams that, like, a month ago you were going, I don't know, they could be like 8-4, and now it's like, oh boy, oh no. Like USC just blown out at home by Oregon State. Virginia Tech is like falling apart now. North Carolina is falling apart right now. Navy might be the worst Navy team since like the Charlie Weatherby era. Virginia is bad. I mean, Georgia Tech might be the best remaining team on that schedule, and they lost to Northern Illinois earlier this year. Like, I mean, that is remarkably bad. And I mean, you want to talk about the Notre Dame Wisconsin game? That was Wisconsin was leading that game 13-10 in the beginning of the fourth quarter, and then Notre Dame won it 41-13. Like, what? What? How did this happen?
I was watching that, and I was home. I was going to leave for campus once the game was over. But once Notre Dame got up 24-13, I knew it was over. So it's like, well, there's no coming back from this when Wisconsin offense is as bad as it is. And so I'm driving, I'm going to campus, I'm listening to some other game. I think I'm listening to like a wraparound show. And then they mentioned that Graham Mertz had thrown 2 pick sixes. And I think the craziest thing is I wasn't that surprised. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. I was instead like, I believe that based on what I've seen. And boy, I don't know. He's like an 80s one-hit wonder. Like the first time we ever saw him, boom, this is like Dexy's Midnight Runners out here singing Come On Eileen. And then what we get from the rest of them, it's like a whole bunch of B-sides. I don't care for the sound, and I would like to listen to another band, please. And it's unfortunate. Every team in the nation, every program in the nation wanted Graham Mertz. Wisconsin got him. And now I don't want to say they're stuck with him, but now they're not as good as they thought they'd be. And you see people wanting Chase Wolf, the backup, and we've got there's a lot of that going around nationally, wanting that backup. But he just looks so uncomfortable and so timid and so inaccurate. I don't know what happened. I expected so much more out of him.
Well, that whole offense just looks off this year. It looks like, you were expecting a big year out of Graham Mertz, and it hasn't happened. Jalen Berger, you were sort of expecting the Wisconsin running back year. And when I say that, you know exactly what I mean. Like, guy no one really knew of, wasn't super highly ranked, and then just turns into a 1,400 yard a year back because that's what they do at Wisconsin. He hasn't done that. The offensive line has not looked like a Wisconsin offensive line. They have not been as dominating as a typical Wisconsin offensive line. Like everything just looks a little off this year. And, week 1, you saw them lose 16-10 to Penn State. And it was like, wow, that must be a really good defense for both of those teams to hold each other down like that. And now it's like, well, maybe they might just not have a good offense.
Maybe. Jury's still out. Let's see what we see after 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games before we start making decisions or baseless accusations about somebody's bad offense. Tom, speaking of somebody's bad offense, I want to discuss Oklahoma right now. They win 16-13 over West Virginia, get a field goal at the end of the game to get the win over West Virginia. Oklahoma rushes for 57 yards on 28 attempts. Spencer Rattler, their quarterback, their preseason Heisman favorite quarterback, played okay, but not to the level that Oklahoma fans have spoiled Oklahoma fans have come to expect from their quarterbacks. They just churn them out, get some transfers in, and then they churn out the transfer and get another one in. Now they got a freshman that they had to develop on their own, Tom. This stuff takes some time. And so he was getting booed. The crowd is chanting, "We want Caleb." I referring to Caleb Wilson. Williams, their freshman quarterback, another 5-star guy that Lincoln Riley brought in. And you just have another situation similar to others in the country where you have all of these high expectations and things are just off, and they're off for similar reasons to what's going on in Clemson.
And they're off for similar reasons to what's going on in Wisconsin, too. I think the skill talent isn't quite what it normally is at Oklahoma, and the offensive line isn't what you normally expect from Oklahoma, and the quarterback isn't what they were sort of expecting heading into the season with Oklahoma. And that all adds up to, hey, this offense that can normally move the ball up and down the field can't move the ball at all. And, the really bitter irony for Oklahoma fans right now is they finally have a pretty good defense. Like coming into the year, I was talking about Oklahoma as potentially a national championship team because they finally have the defense. Because you just sort of assumed, well, it's a given that they have the offense. So if they finally have the defense, then they have both of the things that you need. Well, turns out it is not a given that they have the offense. But I mean, Oklahoma, Clemson, like it all starts up front for both of those teams. And it is bad news on the offensive line. Like if Oklahoma, think about the Oklahoma teams in the past, how much they were able to run the ball. They could just run the ball all over you. Same with Clemson. I mean, Clemson obviously threw the ball a good bit, but it was like they could run whenever they wanted to run. They could push you around. They could protect the quarterback. This year, like none of it. And, I mean, you talk to college football coaches and they will all tell you it all starts up front. If you can win in the trenches, you win the game. And I think you're seeing that for both of those teams, and you're seeing it in a very negative way because Clemson is dead already. I mean, they've got 2 losses already. Like Clemson could go 7-5 or something like that, and it would not be a huge shock at this point. Like they look like lost, and it's not like they have a particularly difficult schedule. They could go like 7-5, 8-4 against kind of a crappy schedule. So that's remarkable. And then you go to Oklahoma, and it's like Oklahoma they had one decisive win, and it was against an FCS team. Like all the FBS teams they've played this year, they've looked kind of bad and been kind of like in question against all of them. And it's like Tulane and who'd they have this last weekend? They had Nebraska, Nebraska, but then West Virginia. West Virginia this week. And look, West Virginia's fine. Nebraska's fine, but it's like they're not. This is not like you're playing Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama. This is Nebraska and West Virginia and Tulane, and you're in these like dog fights every week, and eventually that catches up with you. So I have been saying for a couple of weeks now, I think that catches up with them this weekend in Manhattan, and because K-State has beaten them 2 years in a row, and that's a tough place to play. And K-State is exactly the kind of team that is just going to punch you in the mouth. And I don't know if I think this is an Oklahoma team that's going to respond real well to that.
I can see Kansas State just being okay kicking field goals. All we need 4 field goals and a touchdown and win like 19-17, something like that. Just really, really ugly. So yeah, they have Kansas State this week. Then it's the Red River rivalry. After that, they also will have to go on the road later in the season in November at Baylor, at Oklahoma State, the other 2 undefeated teams in the Big 12. And it's hard to imagine Oklahoma going undefeated at this point, but they are still undefeated. So keep them in mind. But that offense is really puzzling right now, and it's eventually going to catch up with them, I think. And we keep expecting them. I don't want to say we time. I don't want to speak for you, me, and others. At some point, you just expect the offense to go, but that also requires an offensive line to just be really, really good. And if you're not really, really good, and sometimes you're good and sometimes you're not, then you're doing well. But it just takes one bad play to go on a 1st and 10 to be like 2nd and 17, and now you're uphill the entire way. So Oklahoma, we'll see how they do. What, you got something?
No, I was just going to say, yeah. Normally Oklahoma operates with this pretty big margin for error because they can just. Do you need 7 points? Yeah, sure. We'll get you 7 points in the next 43 seconds. This year, in the past, it's been, it's okay if the defense gives up 40 because the offense is going to score 50. This year, it's like, oh boy, hope the defense doesn't give up 20 because that could be a tall order.
Oklahoma and Clemson in their conference games this year probably going to like combine to average what they each averaged last year in points per game, and that's crazy. I want to discuss Iowa for not too long because it's Iowa. So how much time can you really spend on it? Trailing 14-7 at the half against Colorado State. This is one of those where it was Colorado State, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. they're just so Iowa-y, and rushed for 54 yards. Their second half touchdown drives, Tom, for Iowa, 6 yards and 41 yards, and a field goal drive of 21 yards. If Colorado State doesn't just give them the ball in really good position, who knows how this game ends? And is Iowa would Iowa have been able to earn it rather than, well, I can't say they didn't earn it, but if Colorado State plays a safer, more sound game of football, this one could have gone poorly for Iowa, and that has me thinking. Not that I thought that Iowa is going to be undefeated at this point, but I think I feel a lot better about Ohio State's chances in the Big Ten this year based on what I saw this week, including this game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who you're really buying into in the West at this point. Like, I think Iowa would be my pick because I think Wisconsin's maybe real vulnerable and real flawed this year, and Minnesota just lost to Bowling Green, so check them off the list of anything, literally any list. Check them off of that. I don't know. I think we're going to know a lot more about Iowa this weekend. Next weekend is the one you would think I would be saying because that's the Penn State game at home. Iowa at home, like I will always be a believer in Iowa at home. It just I think they will beat Penn State. I'm more interested in at Maryland. That's this Friday night. Talia Tagovailoa has been flinging it around. I mean, we were talking, I think earlier, might have been before we were hit record, but I mean, how many passing yards he's had? 300 and averaging 350 yards a game or something like that on the road at Maryland. Iowa at home and Iowa on the road are two very different teams. So I'm going to be interested to see what Iowa on the road looks like at Maryland on Friday night. I don't necessarily read that much into the Colorado State thing because this is a game that you just every year. This is Iowa. Iowa does this. We looked at before the season and looked at the Kent State game the week after the Iowa State game, and it was like, oh, that's where they're going to do it. That's where we're going to find the banana peel because they always find the banana peel at one point. And you thought, okay, it's going to be the Kent State game for sure. And then they didn't. And then they won that 30-7. They were kind of in control the whole time. I was like, oh, well, maybe they're not going to do it this year. And then they played Colorado State, who is just trash. Colorado State got blown out at home by Vanderbilt, who got blown out at home by East Tennessee State. And, so Colorado State is a disaster. And, so this is, I guess this is a positive for Iowa that they had that game and they're good enough this year to win and not have this be a terrible loss where they lose to North Dakota State or they lose to some terrible MAC team or something. I mean, they're good for one of these like every other year, and you can see it coming. But they survived it this year, so I guess good for them. But yeah, let's see what happens Friday night in Maryland because that's one of those. It would not shock me at all if Iowa's offense struggled a little bit and Maryland moved the ball, scored a couple touchdowns, and I was playing from behind, and then they're out of their comfort zone, and then you throw a pick six, and all of a sudden it's 31-13 Maryland, and the crowd's going, the 27,000 people are there are going crazy, and Kirk Ferentz is looking a little, distraught on the sidelines, and we've seen those games before. You've seen the roof fall in for Iowa. This is a week when I sort of think like this is the week that maybe it happens before the Penn State game, and if it does, then they go home and they just pants Penn State and just, bludgeon them to death, 21-10. And it's just this, really brutalist Kirk Ferentz masterpiece.
I can't wait for this Maryland game. It's just so bizarre to see Iowa at Maryland at night, national television. Maryland has this offense. Iowa has this defense. It's like when you go to a show you go to a concert to see a punk band and they do country covers. Like, we're just going to do some country standards. And you're like, well, okay, it's going to be odd. It ends up being like the best show you've ever seen. And you didn't even know you wanted it, but now you're like, this was awesome. And this could be that, or it could be Iowa against Maryland.
Hang on. I'm Googling punk cover of Jolene. I'm going to see what happens. We're going to see what comes up.
I'm sure there's a bunch of them, actually. Tom, let's wrap up with some more Big Ten. Michigan 20-13 over Rutgers. We will have our separate Michigan Monday podcast for you guys tomorrow. Michigan rushes for 112 yards. That's less than a third of their average. that they've been rushing for this season. A long carry of just 13 yards. Not great. Cade McNamara, 9 of 16 for 163 yards. If this game gets played 10 times, I'm not so sure the Rutgers doesn't come out with like three of the wins. Like they had some chances. They had Michigan guessing a couple of times. They were playing it very conservative as well, which, I guess why not? But Greg Schiano did give them some points. They did also miss a field goal. Like this could have really been a dicey situation. And Rutgers did have the ball at the end to drive for a game tying or perhaps game winning score. And so this is pretty eye opening. I think it's eye opening for Michigan as well. And maybe they needed it. And so maybe this is a blessing in disguise for the Wolverines and also maybe for other teams in the Big Ten to realize if Rutgers can do this, so can we.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think Wisconsin would need a lot of encouragement to think that, yeah, we can beat Michigan because they have just absolutely kicked Michigan's face in the last few times they've played. But guess where Michigan goes this weekend? At Nebraska. At Wisconsin. Yep. And then at Nebraska the week after that. Then they're home for Northwestern, and then they're at Michigan State the week after that. I mean, the remaining road schedule for them is at Wisconsin, at Nebraska, at Michigan State, at Penn State, at Maryland. Like, those are 5 losable games. No, even Michigan's look good this year.
Mm-hmm.
Even with that said, like those are 5 losable games. And then you get Ohio State at home, you get Indiana at home. I mean, there's just the back half of the schedule is brutal and a lot tougher than I think. I think we came into the year thinking Michigan was going to be bad and therefore was going to struggle. Now it's like, yeah, Michigan's probably pretty good, but they still might struggle because the back half of the schedule now looks pretty tough. This is a little another barometer game for me this weekend because this is a team that has just annihilated Michigan in recent years. Like if this is really a different Michigan team, they will take, they will kick the crap out of what is a pretty flawed Wisconsin team. But I'm going to be very interested to see, does the defense hold up against the run? Can they move the ball in the Wisconsin defense? Because, if you see a big Michigan win, that's going to be about as good an indication like, yep, this Michigan team really is what I think their fans are hoping it is.
I think Wisconsin's defense is pretty legitimate. I think Michigan's going to have some trouble running the ball. And I think it just comes down to which quarterback plays better. And if Graham Mertz hits some of those throws against Michigan's secondary and you win 24-21, 24-20, something like that. But I can't put any faith right now in Mertz and the offense to do that. I don't know who would run the ball. Ches Malusi has done well, but he was kind of invisible against Notre Dame. I'm not sold on Michigan's defense, their run defense at all. And maybe this is where Wisconsin wakes up. But I've seen enough from Wisconsin's offense to not expect too much from them against Michigan's defense. And I don't know what the under is, but I might go ahead and lock that in right now, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's. I mean, without looking at the line, I would say yes. That is probably the play because you're right. I mean, it's just two teams that you feel like the odds are they're going to be the defenses are going to hold the offenses more or less in check. You would think that's I think where I would land on that. Michigan a 1-point favorite right now. That's the current line on that game. So I have not seen a point spread, but anyway, an over under. Yeah. That's it. It feels like that's going to be a fairly close, fairly low scoring game, which those are the ones where, if it turns into a blowout and not like a Notre Dame for Wisconsin blowout, where this is secretly a close, low scoring game that ended up not looking like a close, low scoring game. I think if you see one of these teams really blow the other one out, that's going to tell me a lot about, I think it's going to tell me more about the team that gets blown out than it does about the team that does the blowing out. Or I guess maybe more specifically, it will tell me more about Michigan if they blow Wisconsin out or if they get blown out. That will tell me more about Michigan than it will about Wisconsin. Does that make sense?
I would no, not today.
My work here is done.
Exactly. But it fits with the entire season, as we talked about in the beginning. The over-under over under on that is 43.5,
Ooh.
which my 24-20 prediction, I don't, I don't want to take the over on that. We'll have to talk. We'll talk about that one later in the week. We'll see what that line is at that point, because that's real low.
Yeah.
Michigan,
I mean, I mean, last week there were a bunch of games that was like, wow, this is a really low over under, and it was like 48. Like, and now 4 points less than that. Like, woo, that's like, are they only playing a half? Like, that's Even when you don't think there's going to be a lot of scoring, that's still not very much scoring.
I saw another over under this week that was like 80. I think it's Alabama and Ole Miss is what I saw. It was like,
that one's gonna be fun. That one's gonna be
because
fun.
it's a 20-point line and with an 80 point, so they're looking for like a 50-30 type of score or something. That one, it will be fun. Michigan State, Nebraska. Michigan State wins it in overtime, 23-20. I was a little bit disappointed by Michigan State, but it was good to see them struggle and overcome it and win. And sure, it was at home, but there was no Sparty no type of thing. It was also good to see Nebraska fight and almost win this. However, we have seen Nebraska almost win too often. And that's one of Scott Frost's problem. They need to start winning, and maybe they'll get Michigan in a couple of weeks, because I could see Adrian Martinez, his running game, giving them some issues. But good to see Michigan State struggle, still win. They had 7 sacks, 11 tackles for loss against Nebraska. But they could not run the ball. And this is the first team all year to stop Michigan State's running game. So I guess that's a positive sign for the other teams in the Big Ten, as well as Nebraska. But man, that's a tough loss for Nebraska. At some point, they have to start winning these, and not just, they're just there in the background. It's like, yeah, we needed somebody. Here you are. We've now beaten you. You can go back home now. Your purpose is done. You've done what we needed you here to do. And they're like an extra in a movie. Now go.
Yeah, I do feel bad for Nebraska, because it's just, you can see they're getting better. The results aren't actually better, but you can see that the team is getting better. They have a defense now. Like, how long has it been that we've talked about Nebraska? Like, well, they don't have a defense. They don't have an offense either, but they don't have a defense. And the black shirts were kind of this running joke for like 10 years, because it was just like every time Ohio State would go in there, they'd score 60 points. And it was just like, oh, look, it's the famed black shirts giving up the 9th touchdown of the game again. Like, this is like, they now have a defense. It sure looks like. I mean, they held Oklahoma to 23. They held Michigan State to 23 in overtime, 3 points to Buffalo, 7 points to Fordham. I mean, like, the loss to Illinois is looking like a real outlier. But it's just like, this has been the Scott Frost thing. Like, there has been progress. You can tell there's progress. You can tell this team is getting better, but it's not showing up in the standings. And that is historically a very important place where people measure your progress, is in wins and losses. That is traditionally one of the more consistent ways that college football coaches get evaluated, is by wins and losses. So that's a problem, and they have to start winning some. This week they got Northwestern, got Michigan the week after that, at Minnesota the week after that, home for Purdue the week after that. I mean, you have 4 games before you play Ohio State. You're probably not beating Ohio State, and then you're at Wisconsin, and you're home for Iowa. But you got 4 games right now where, they're 2-3, Northwestern, Michigan, at Minnesota, Purdue. You got to go 3-1. You got to go 3-1. And then you got to steal one of the last 3, where you go 4-0. But you've got to get to a bowl game this year. Like, I am begging you, please get to a bowl game this year. You deserve to get to a bowl game this year, but you have to win. Like, you have blown 2 winnable games. And you had a third one against Oklahoma that no one would have looked at as winnable before the game, which turned out to be winnable. Like, you were right in that game all the way to the end of the game. But you got to win. You got to win the winnable games. They've blown 2 of them, so the margin for error now is pretty slim. It's still there, but you got to win your winnable games.
I would like to say, I think Nebraska's record right now, I know you'll say it's 2-3. I'm going to say it's 2-1-2. 2 wins, 1 loss, 2 moral victories. Great job in those close games. And I agree. Things are looking better. They're still losing, but things are looking better. You lose to Northwestern at home, it's all out the window. Like, any goodwill is gone, and you can't have that happen. So that's a pretty big game for Nebraska, even though they should be fine. But we've heard that before. So we'll see how that goes. And I am looking forward, definitely, when Michigan comes to town the week after that. Tom, anything else before we go?
One more team I just want to throw out there. This is a more national conversation. BYU, number 13, 4-0. They haven't been incredible. They beat Arizona by 8. They beat Utah by 9. They beat Arizona State by 10. They beat USF by 8. None of those teams are great. Utah, I think, has been exposed as a very not good team this year. But here they are 4-0. And here's the remaining schedule: at Utah State, home for Boise State, who's not the typical Boise State. At Baylor, that's kind of interesting. At Wazoo is bad. Home for Virginia is not good. Home for Idaho State. Home for Georgia Southern, who just fired their coach because they have been a disaster this year. And at USC, who also, see previous comment, fired their coach because they've been a disaster this year. I mean, I think you're going to get into that is entirely plausible that they run that schedule. Not a guarantee. At Baylor is going to be a little tricky. Boise State's never a gimme. But, you go through that, you run that schedule. I don't know if it's going to be strong enough. I mean, you're going to have if you run that schedule, you have 4 Pac-12 wins, plus a Big 12 win, plus a Boise State win. Like, you could argue that that's, especially in a weird season like this, you could argue that that's a team that deserves to get into the playoff. If, especially if Cincinnati is, Cincinnati dumps one somewhere along the way. So that's one of those teams that I think not enough people are talking about right now. Not that they're fantastic, not that they would go toe to toe with Alabama on a neutral field, but like, just keep them in mind as while you're sort of ticking off these teams in your head, hey, out of the Pac-12, or it's Oregon. Out of the Big 12, it's Oklahoma or Baylor or Oklahoma State. Just keep BYU in mind. That's another team that just, I'm not saying they deserve to go. I'm not saying they would be competitive. I'm just saying keep them in mind. They may be in the conversation longer than you think this year.
And I will say, if Oregon loses and you have, say, an Arkansas or an Ole Miss who get beat by Alabama and that's all, then do we have 3 SEC teams and BYU and whoever, where it's like, well, you can't leave Ole Miss out. Their only losses to Alabama. This is the year to do it. I mean, there are no good teams, so why not put the best teams in from the best league? I mean, we're just trying to find the best group of 4. That's all the committee does, Tom. They just try to find the best. It's not about finding certain conferences and changing the guidelines to fit whichever 4 teams you want. That's not what that's about. And for you to even accuse them, Tom, it disgusts me.
Tony, the idea of 3 SEC teams in the college football playoffs at the same time reminds me of a clip of the late great Norm Macdonald that I saw recently, where he's on Conan with Courtney Thorne-Smith. And she's talking about a movie that she's in, and I think it was Adam Sandler was in the movie with her, but there's someone who, it was Carrot Top. Yes, Carrot Top was in the movie with her. And she's talking about the movie, and then Norm Macdonald chimes in his Norm Macdonald ways. And I'm not even going to do a Norm Macdonald impression because I won't do it well, but not that that's ever stopped me before on this show, but I'm a little respect for the recently deceased. He says, I know what the movie's called. And everyone kind of freezes like, oh, what is it, Norm? And he goes, Box Office Poison. And that's, sorry, I don't know why that reminded me of that when you were talking about 3 SEC teams in the college football playoff. I'm not sure why I thought that of that phrase just there.
Yeah, that is one of the great clips of all time. I actually saw it live when it happened, and I was blown away by it. So if you don't know what we're talking about, find it on YouTube. Norm Macdonald, Conan, Courtney Thorne-Smith, chairman of the board, Carrot Top. Any of those search terms will get it there for you. But that will then, go ahead.
Also, Tony, Box Office Poison.
That if you just search Box Office Poison, that will find it there as well. Norm was awesome on that particular episode and most episodes. So I think that will do it, Tom. We have talked about this past weekend, looked a little bit forward to the next week, and just know something crazy is going to happen. And we're going to all be like, why didn't we see this? We knew it was stupid. We knew it was dumb. Why did we think it would be smart? Like, what? You gave me an algebra 6 test. Of course I'm not going to pass it. I'm algebra 1.5 at most. And you gave me this. That's your fault. It's not my fault. So that will do it then. I want to thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening as always. Please check us out at buckeyescoop.com. If you're not yet a member, now's the perfect time to become one. You can also find all of our videos, YouTube's, podcasts, interviews, streams at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Subscribe. You'll get notified every time we drop a new video. So thank you all, and we will talk to you tomorrow.